So I'll go ahead and start. My name is Dan Preby, and I am an actuary. I grew up in the health field, so I've been an actuary now for about 25 years.
My name is Jim Miles. I've been a volunteer in the education system since the year after I became a fellow, became a fellow in 1980, so a long time ago.
Okay, hi, I'm Stuart Klugman. I'm currently a staff fellow working for the Society of Actuaries. Been doing that since 2009.
So I'm going to talk about assessing the exam and the grading process. So we'll just start from the beginning on the grading process, okay? So what happens after you actually take the exams? They're all collected, and as Stuart mentioned, they're sent to the SOA. And so the SOA then actually separates all the papers out, and then they'll break down those papers by question. And so a couple key points to keep in mind here then is that on your questions, you want to make sure that the questions, you don't put like 1 and 2 on the same page, but it's okay to have 1A and 1B on the same page. If B bleeds over into the second page, that's okay. It's the questions that will actually be broken out, okay? And the SOA staff makes a very good faith effort on if there are missing candidate numbers up at the top of the page to write those in, and also to write in the question number. It's hard for them to do that, so just to kind of reiterate what Stuart was mentioning, try and do that on all your pages that you turn in. Okay. So in any case, the pages are separated out by question, and then take the group health exam, for instance. Let's talk about the advanced exam. So the advanced exam then, what will happen is all the questions will be separated out. There are at least 2 graders that will be assigned to each question. Sometimes there's 3, sometimes there's 4. And so let's take a situation where there's 2 graders. So Stuart and I are grading, and so he'll get half the papers and I'll get half the papers. So the SOA is sending them to us. Prior to receiving those papers, we've already received the question. One of us may have actually written the question. We have the guidance of what the answers actually are, so that guidance will include the answers. So we have all that information. So then we'll have 20 what we call common papers. So they're papers that he has as well as what I have. We'll each grade them independently, and then we'll have a conference call. And in that conference call, we have to talk about the scores that we gave each one of those 20 papers, okay? And if it turns out, a couple things could happen. The best is that we come up with exactly the same or very similar scores. And in that case, we know that our interpretations are the same, how we're reading the papers is the same, and then we'll go off and actually score the rest of our halves of the paper, okay? Let's take the other extreme, where we're way off, then what we'll have to do is reconcile what those differences actually are, okay? So if there's an interpretation of what's actually being written versus what's on the guidance, we'll have to actually reconcile that. And then we may end up actually having to change the guidance, in which case we would actually have to take it back to the item writer, back to the vice chair, back to the chair, back to the GO to actually talk about changing, if we needed to actually change that guidance, okay? So those are 2 of the extremes. Another situation that may happen, and actually has happened, is we may end up where a pretty high percentage of those 20 papers have very consistent answers, but they're nowhere near what the guidance is, okay? And what's happened there is that the belief was that the way that question was worded, it would direct the candidates in a particular direction on that syllabus, when it actually steered them towards something else. In those situations, what actually has to happen is similar to what we were talking about in the previous example, where we have to get the item writer, the person who wrote the question, we have to get the vice chair, the chair, and possibly the general officer of the exam to talk about that and to rewrite that exam, guidance on the grading, to make sure that that direction that those people were taking is actually graded appropriately, okay? So what would happen is, let's say that 17 of them went this way and 3 went this way, both answers would actually be correct, okay? A similar situation may be that some people that may be working in the industry may find that there was an answer that is also appropriate because of the way that the practice actually works, but that may or may not be consistent with the syllabus item. That's also taken into consideration, and then the grading guidance is adjusted appropriately, okay? So what we're trying to do, bottom line, is we're trying to give the candidates the benefit of the doubt in the way that we're actually grading the questions, okay? So that's, now we've taken care of the common 20 papers. So then we've reconciled that, so Stuart will go off and grade his half, I'll go off and grade my half, and then we'll probably around maybe 5 weeks after the exam is actually taken, we'll come together at what we call central grading. Now, prior to central grading, what will happen is I'll have to go into the computer, enter in my scores. Stuart will do the same thing. The SOA will combine those. We get to central grading, and then there's a list of papers that will then be second graded. Okay, and so how do you determine what that is? And so if you take the extremes, you can tell people who are going to pass. Okay, so those people are not going to be second graded. You can tell people who are probably going to fail. Well, I shouldn't say probably, but who are going to fail. Those people are not going to be second graded. The majority of folks are in the middle there, and they're all going to be second graded. And so what would happen is that I would get the list of papers that would need to be second graded that Stuart had graded the first time, and vice versa. Then I would have to go back in, second grade all of those papers, and then at central grading, Stuart and I would then have to sit down and reconcile the papers and the scores. And what do I mean by reconcile? So what happens is that there's a total number of points that's given for a particular question. And so those points, there's a tolerance that's allowed within the grading points. And if we're within the tolerance, his score and my score, the difference, then they don't have to be, we don't have to reconcile those papers. But the ones that are outside of that tolerance, we'll have to reconcile and sit down and actually talk about them. And I'm trying to think of what percentage are outside the tolerance. I think some of it depends on the question itself and the nature of the question, but most of them are going to be within the tolerance, okay? Once we get that set up, then the second scores are entered in, and then the final score, actually the second score is the final score, and then it goes off to actually be, to determine what the pass mark actually is. So bottom line, I think that to keep in mind is that the graders, they spend a ton of time grading these papers. All of them have been in the same situation you guys have been in, and they're giving you the benefit of the doubt. So what they're looking for is demonstration of the knowledge that's being asked within the question, okay? I would say, I'm trying to think of hours that's spent. It's quite a few hours, and again, they're all volunteer, but I would say part of the attraction in doing it is, one is that you really do network with really good people in doing this, and they typically, central grading is done in a pretty nice location, even though you're inside working, grading on the exam. So
The outside is nice.
the outside is nice, yes. So before I get into the actual setting of the pass mark, are there any questions on the grading?
And you mentioned, for example, in your example, you and Stuart being graders, you would be only grading one problem and setting the pass mark for only one problem. No. Okay.
There's not a pass mark per problem. There's a pass mark for the entire exam.
So you would be grading the entire exam. You would be grading all the problems on a particular exam.
So what will happen with let's separate the grading from the pass mark itself, okay? So in grading, the committee is typically going to be roughly about 40 people. And those 40 people are going to be grading, 10, 20 questions. So you'll end up with 1 or 2 questions per grading pair or grading set. So that Stuart and I would only be looking at 1 question or 2
maybe 2.
questions at the most. Okay, so we're only going to be seeing this. We're not going to be seeing the exam in totality. Okay. I don't know if that answered your question, but so that, again, let's separate that from the actual
So
setting of
the
pass
two of
mark.
us come to agreement on the scores. The scores are then entered and totaled along with the scores given by all the other graders. And now it's time, with that complete picture of how candidates did on the entire exam, now it's time to set the pass mark.
Right.
I'm kind of trying to get clarification on that. When you said that, there's, these guys are going to pass, these guys are not going to pass, is that after taking all the questions into consideration, or just that one question that you were grading with Stuart?
It's taking all of them into consideration. So let's take an extreme example where you may have somebody, that's a 10-question exam, somebody skipped 9 of them and answered the 10th one and did very, very well on it. They're going to be on the low end of that, and they're probably going to be outside of that corridor.
Yeah, either your entire exam is second graded or none of it.
Correct, that's right.
Okay, and then just when you were talking about how you entered scores into things and you discuss if you have differences in your scores, when you're talking about scores like that, are you talking about getting X out of 14 points, or are you talking, do you specifically say, this is a 6, or this is a 10, or this is a 5, and those are the score differences that you look at?
Right, so the graders, and actually for that matter, when you set the pass mark, we're not actually looking at the score that you'll actually receive, whether it's a 1 or a 10 or whatever it may be. The way that we're actually looking at it is it's pass-fail.
Yeah, the 0 to 10 score, all that's done at the very end. So up until the pass mark is set, everything's done on the actual exam points being earned.
Okay, so you look at it as of out of 100 points, this is how many you would have gotten if it was a 100-point exam in total.
Right.
And then I guess, so for example, if you fail the exam, you can see how many, what your scores were on each individual question. So then is that something that's done later when you're if you know that someone failed, then is at that point you go back and give them a score for each
That's
individual
correct.
question?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll go ahead. That's something that's not very well understood even by me. But we have an algorithm. The problem is just so you all know, if you fail, you get a 0 to 10 score, not just for the whole exam, but for each question. And the problem is there isn't a pass mark score assigned. So the committee does not say for that 14-point question, a passing score is 7 or 3 or 10 or whatever. There isn't one, right? Because you only pass or fail the entire exam. So what we do at the office, not the committees, is they've got an algorithm that essentially tries to deduce, based on candidate performance, imputes a passing score for each question, which we don't reveal. And so if the passing score was 6 and you got 4 out of 6, then that might equate to a 3 on your report. So it's how you fared relative to a pretend pass score. And I want to emphasize the pretend. It's an approximation. So, and it also varies greatly because if a question was particularly hard or particularly easy, so the scores were generally low or high, that tends to distort this figure. And the one thing that's absolutely true, if you take a weighted average of those scores, it won't agree with your overall score for the exam. And the zeros mess that up, if nothing else. So it's to give you some guidance. And, we kind of have a standard response. Somebody says, well, I only got a 2 on that question. I thought I did okay. I didn't blow it completely. I thought I did okay. And he says, well, this is just a rough guidance. You kind of did below average on it, but that's really all you should take away from it. Don't get precise with those numbers. So we're trying to give you a little guidance, but because we don't have a pass mark for each question, we can't compute a precise 0 to 10 score for you for that question.
There are 3 times when you actually set the pass mark. So one of them is prior to the actual exam being sat for. So who sets the pass mark? It's typically done by the chair of each exam in discussion or letting the SOA and the education executive team know. Okay, so that pass mark is set before everybody takes the exam. Everybody takes the exams, it's graded, all of the questions are brought together, it goes through the Society of Actuary algorithm. The chair gets a report that at times can run 200 pages with a lot of statistics in it, a lot of information in it. That information is then used to set what I'll call the preliminary pass mark, and that's after the first grading is actually done, okay? Then the chair will actually look to see how close the preliminary pass mark and the tentative pass mark were to each other. They'll look at that, but really the important point is on this last one. The final pass mark is done after the second grading. All of the second graders' papers, the scores will be entered in. The SOA goes through its algorithms. The chair will get the report, and then the pass mark will be set based off of the different statistics that are actually given out. Now, what may happen at central grading with the tentative pass mark is we talked about the range of folks that we had, right? And so let's say now that we've set that pass mark and we have a couple of folks that are primarily below or just below whatever that pass mark is. Those papers will be pulled out and looked at individually to see if the candidate actually is demonstrating knowledge in aggregate to see if they actually should pass. And so that preliminary and actually, or the tentative pass mark and the final pass mark will be based off of looking at those particular exams as well. So it's something that may be set, we'll look at them, and we may lower it just a bit just to get those to pass if those people actually did demonstrate in aggregate that they demonstrated the knowledge that they needed to know. Any questions on that? I know I breezed through that, but I had 5 minutes.
After an exam is given, the questions are published, a model solution is published. As part of the model solution, there's grader comments. I would encourage you to go look at the model solutions for your exam and other tracks. Read the grader comments and see what the deficiencies were in people's answers, what they did well, what they didn't. It's great guidance in terms of what you need to do on the exam to get a passing paper. And those are much, much better than don't go back any further than maybe 3 years, because before that they were terrible. But the more recent ones have been much more well thought out and provide a lot of guidance.
I wanted to dispel one myth, because I've actually seen it in emails a couple times recently. It did used to be the case that a model solution was a good candidate paper reproduced. That is not true. Model solutions are a paper that represent a perfect score. If that exact solution was written down, it would get all the points. Now, if you've been following all the other discussion, it also could be that other solutions would also be worth full points. They don't necessarily write every permutation or everything you could put down that was point worthy, but there's at least enough in the model solution that if that was done, all the points would be earned.
I meant that this model solution that is picked from amongst available candidates.
No. It's based on the grading guide, but it's not the grading guide. So that's another misconception. The model solution is not what the graders have in front of them as they assign points, because in particular, the model solution doesn't explain how points were assigned.
Right.
But it's based on the item writer's view of what they thought would be a full credit answer. So the model solution is made up by the item writers, not from a candidate paper.